Would you please pray with me? God, may the words of my lips and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable unto you this morning. Amen. Good morning, church. Happy Veterans Day weekend. I have a great, powerful story to share with you today. I assure you that this story is true and that I got permission from my friend to share his story this morning. My friend is an older man, one of the few people we have left who served in the Second World War. And he shared a story with me that was so powerful that I couldn't stop thinking about it for the last 6 months. And so I'm happy to be able now to share it with you. If you want to see my friend, I have a picture of him that I drew on the front of the bulletin. It's a little cartoon. This story, you can imagine my friend in it while you're listening to it. It's a remarkable story of service. And it's a story that shows that sometimes giving a good turn makes its way back to you. Like I said already, this is a true story, and hopefully by the end I'll have proven it to you that it's true. And it's a story that I think connects so well with the Bible verse that we hear today from Luke 25 or 21. And it is a lesson that comes down to us through many examples through history. That you never know the results when you do a kind thing. You never know. Most of the time, if we do something kind, we don't see the results. And we might trick ourselves into thinking that what we do is inconsequential or that good deeds don't have an impact on the world, that the problems of the world are so big that the small drops in the bucket that we give of goodness can feel insignificant. No good thing is ever wasted. No good deed is ever inconsequential. My friend, when he was 17, enlisted in the Army in 1944. Imagine a 17-year-old that you know. Is there anyone who's close to 17 in the congregation today? A teenager? Archie, stand up. I think Archie's the closest. Archie, stand up. All right. All right. That's the level of little babiness we're talking about, okay? Little babies. But in 1944, the war was still very much happening in Europe, and soldiers were needed. And so my friend, when he was 17, even though he wasn't of age, he enlisted. He turned 18 on a ship bigger than our town common, rounding the Horn of Africa. It was such a dangerous time that the ships at night would have to go without lights. And he shared with me a fascinating story about sneaking through the Suez Canal by night so that they couldn't be seen by the enemy with the lights from their ships. Naples in Italy had just been liberated. And it was a great victory for the Allied partners. But there was a lot of destruction left in the wake of the initial capture and then retaking of Naples. My friend had an older serviceman who was a friend of his named Leo. And Leo's job was to drive in an enormous canvas-backed truck and drive into Naples and pick up all the servicemen who were on leave and had gone out to the bars and had a little bit of too much of a good time. He would pick them up in the back of this canvas truck and then take them back to the barracks. One day, my friend went out on a ride with this older gentleman in the canvas truck, and the gentleman realized that my friend didn't know how to drive. So my friend learned how to drive in Naples at night in an enormous truck without power steering. What a way to learn, just jumping right in. It was a lot of fun for the young men who were in Naples because the fighting was over. It was a relatively safe place to be. And my friend was shocked to find out from his friend Leo that when he made his nightly trips into Naples, that he saw a lot of poverty. Especially there was a lot of children who had been displaced by the war, people who were left orphaned, people who had suffered terrible injuries, or just people who didn't have enough money to pay for food. And looking around, the young servicemen noticed that at the barracks that they were staying at, there was a lot of food left over. And so a simple thought occurred to this 18-year-old boy, this 18-year-old young man. He said, we ought to do something about it. And so he and a few friends, with the help of their adult friend Leo, they got some galvanized steel trash cans, trash barrels, scrubbed them out, and then started collecting scraps from the mess hall left over from the young GIs, and they started making these enormous trash cans full of soup under an open fire in a lot that they were allowed to use. And then they would load up the soup that they had made into the back of Leo's truck, and they would drive it into Naples. And they drove it and gave it to the children in the hospital so that they would have something hot to eat. In today's Bible lesson, Luke chapter 21, Jesus warns his followers that if things are going well right now, all you have to do is say, wait a minute. If we get comfortable or complacent in our lives, things are working out well, wait a minute. Eventually, you'll find yourself in over your head. You'll find yourself worried and anxious. You'll find yourself in a situation where you don't know how to act or how to react. You'll be put in situations where you have to decide to do the right thing and what the right thing is. My high school football coach used to tell us that character is who you are when nobody's watching. He says it's really easy to behave when the coach is in the room. It's harder to behave when the coach leaves. It's easy to be honorable when there's someone watching. It's easier to be kind when there's someone taking score. Character, service, is about doing the right thing without expecting anything in return. Doing the right thing when the cameras are off, when the lights are low, and you're not being watched. My friend, when he was only 18, did this act of service, not out of any deep heroism or deep sense of being special, but just because when human beings are met with the suffering of other people, we should be offended by that. We should be offended by people not having enough to eat. We should be offended by people sleeping outside. We should be offended that there are people in our country today who don't have enough to eat. Small things done with great love do have consequences, even if you aren't lucky enough to see the results. Do good without asking what's in it for you. Jesus looks at the temple with his disciples, and they say how grand the temple is, that it's built of stone. How could human beings make something so grand, they wonder. Jesus says, wait a minute. There will come a time when country turns against country, when household turns against household, and every stone of this temple will be overturned. Later in the Gospels, Jesus is preaching about the destruction of the temple, and he says that he will destroy it and then build it up in 3 days. People really don't like that. Imagine if somebody came into church this morning and said they were going to tear our church down. I don't think people would get very excited about that. But of course, he wasn't talking about the temple itself. He was talking about his own body, which would be unjustly arrested, which would be beaten and hung from a cross to die, and then 3 days later, be resurrected again. Resurrection does happen. It's easy for us to talk about resurrection when things are going well. It's harder to talk about resurrection when things aren't going well. We can feel dishonest. How can we talk about hope when there's so much suffering? We are lucky in our country never to have had a war play out on our own soil. But countries who do experience war, the way that it was experienced in Naples, it has a profound impact on the society. People realize that it's not worth striving to make the world better through force because of the destruction that's left behind. We are lucky to have never seen that with our own eyes, partly because of the sacrifices of servicemen and women in our country. Though we may not see the effects, good deeds are never wasted. Fast forward in our story from 1944. Fast forward several decades. My friend is now a grown man, married. And he and his wife go to a party with some of her work friends, and he begins striking up a conversation with a young man with an Italian accent. And he notices that the young man has a piece of his arm missing. And so he does what probably any of us would do after having a conversation with someone that long. And he said, "What happened to your arm?" And he said, "Well, during the war, when Naples was being occupied, I tried to flee, tried to run away from the city on my horse. But an opposition soldier saw me fleeing, decided that he wanted the horse instead, and so he shot me and took it from me." He was only a very young man. But then he says, "Luckily, at the hospital in Naples, where I was being treated, the American soldiers brought soup every day." Our guiding image for this season in our church is weaving. You'll notice the tapestry behind us. Today, during our prayer time of weaving, we'll be writing down the names of servicemen and women who we know or who we care about, and we'll weave them into this growing tapestry behind me. I was reflecting on what weaving is. Weaving is taking two things. Oh, we have like actual knitters in the audience. I'm about to embarrass myself talking about weaving, but Mary Ellen, forgive me if I say it incorrectly. I'll put this back. When we're weaving, we're taking two different things, and we're meeting them together at a shared point. But then we let us go off on our own again. We go apart, and then what do? We come back together again until we make the links. That's what weaving is. Apart, together. Apart, together. Weaving is taking things that seem different or separate and pulling them together, binding them together to make something new. My friend, when he was just a young man, recognized the importance of doing the right thing, doing small acts of love and compassion when you can. Because, as he told me in my office a couple weeks ago, you never know the results when you help. So I'd like to now fulfill my promise to prove that the story is true. And if my friend is here, maybe they could stand up for me, and you could see that they look a little bit different than the drawing from 1944. Charlie, I hope I did your story justice. I double-checked all my facts, but thank you for sharing that story with me. I was inspired. This is my first time getting through the story without sobbing, so I'm actually really proud of myself. Charlie proved to me, through the sharing of this story, that you can't count the cost of service because you can never see the results. If you find yourself in a position where you are in a place of chaos, where things don't make sense when people are suffering, what you can do is follow after this simple example. Instead of trying to fix it, do what you can. Do the right thing in the midst of chaos. Remember that character is who you are when no one is watching. Character is who you are when you do the right thing, even when there's no good place to post it on social media. Do the right thing, because you never know the results when you help. Amen.